What would you do if the most powerful duke in London stopped his own wedding and chose the one girl everyone had been taught to ignore? Eliza Ashbourne came to the cathedral expecting only one thing: to stand quietly in the shadows while her perfect sister became a duchess. Her mother had warned her not to move, not to speak, and above all, not to be noticed. But when the Reverend asked the Duke to accept his bride, he did not say yes. He turned away from the altar, looked past every noble face in the cathedral, and pointed straight at Eliza. One sentence shattered the entire room, not her. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Now let's begin the story. The cathedral doors opened wide, and a sheet of pale morning light spilled down the aisle like a blade drawn from its sheath. The sound that followed was not music, yet not the triumphant swell meant for brides. It was smaller and sharper, the rhythmic tap of shoes against stone, the low rustle of silk, the restrained murmur of London's finest, trying not to sound like they were measuring each other's worth. Every pew was filled. Every face was turned toward the front. And Eliza Ashbourne stood where she had been trained to stand at the back, close to a massive stone column that swallowed her into shadow. It was an old habit, almost a ritual. Even in a place built for vows and saints, she knew her place was not at the center of anything. Her gown was the color of soft ash pale quiet, deliberately unremarkable. It did not glitter. It did not demand attention. It blended into the cold gray of the cathedral walls as if it had been sewn from the same stone. She held her hands together, at her waist gloved fingers tightening around the edge of her own restraint. Her eyes flicked forward through the sea of heads and hats, through shoulders and lace, to where the ceremony waited, like a stage set for someone else. Lady Beatrice Ashbourne appeared at her side with the efficiency of a command delivered on a battlefield. Her crimson mouth did not smile, but her voice remained low, polished, controlled, sharp as the point of a pin. "Stand still," she said. Eliza barely moved her head. "Yes, Mother." Lady Beatrice leaned closer, the scent of expensive perfume and determination curling around her words. "Do not let anyone notice you," she continued. "Today is Charlotte's day, not yours." Eliza's answer came as it always had, quiet, obedient, automatic. "Yes, Mother." It was not even a lie. It was simply the only life she knew how to live. Lady Beatrice drew back and swept her gaze to the front, where the cathedral's brilliant light gathered in a wide circle around her younger daughter like a blessing meant to be seen. Eliza shifted one step deeper into the column's shadow. The light did not follow her there. It ended just short, as if even daylight agreed with her mother's rules. From her place at the back, Eliza could see everything without being part of anything. It was the view of someone who existed for observation, not participation. She watched the guests, lords with decorated lapels, ladies with feathered hats, mothers with eyes like sharpened mirrors. She watched the subtle politics of posture, the careful angling of shoulders, the quick assessments disguised as polite glances. She watched the pews filled with people who had come not only to witness a marriage, but to witness a victory. And she watched Charlotte. Charlotte Ashbourne stood near the altar in a gown of white satin that caught the cathedral light and returned it brighter. Her veil was sheer, her hair arranged in perfect curls pinned with pearls. She looked like every portrait ever painted of a bride meant to secure a family's future. She also looked calm, which was what made Eliza's chest tighten. Charlotte had been taught calm the way other girls were taught piano scales repetition until it became instinct. Eliza knew how much of this moment had been engineered. She remembered years of fittings and lessons she had not been invited to. She remembered being told to stay upstairs when instructors came. She remembered hearing laughter from the drawing room while she sat alone with a book, pretending she did not hear her mother's pride. "Charlotte needs her time," Lady Beatrice would say whenever Eliza appeared at the wrong moment. "Charlotte must be polished." Eliza had once asked as a child, timid and hopeful, "And what about me?" Her mother had looked at her as if the question itself was an inconvenience. "You do not need to be polished," she had replied. "You simply need not to be in the way." It had been delivered without malice. It had been delivered as fact. Over the years, Eliza had learned to interpret those facts the way one learns to interpret weather. Some things could not be argued with. One could only adjust, endure, and move to where the storm was not hitting as hard. There had been dinners where Eliza's voice rose accidentally, one comment, one opinion, one stray thought, and her mother had cut it down before it could take shape. "No one asked you," Lady Beatrice had said, smiling at a guest while dismissing her daughter with a flick of her eyes. Eliza had swallowed her words and tasted shame like iron. Charlotte, on the other hand, had been given an entire world to practice in. She learned how to smile without revealing too much, how to laugh as if laughter were currency, how to make a room think it had discovered her rather than been presented with her. And now the room had come to reward that training. Eliza, Lady Beatrice murmured, not looking back, "Do not fidget." Eliza realized her fingers were tightening again. She forced them still. "Yes, Mother." From the front, Eliza could hear scattered whispers, admiration, curiosity, predictions made in soft tones. Such a match. The Duke as well, he's the Duke. Her mother must be beside herself. Beside herself. Yes, Lady Beatrice had been living toward this moment for years. The Duke of Blackwood. Alexander Blackwood had been spoken of in the ton like an oath. An older name, a colder name, the kind that made young women straighten their spines and ambitious mothers sharpen their plans. He was wealthy enough to make debt disappear and powerful enough to make enemies behave. He had never married, despite years of attempts to lure him. Some claimed he was too severe. Others claimed he was too proud. Eliza had never met him. She had only seen him once from across a ballroom, a tall figure in dark attire whose presence made conversation falter. He didn't flirt. He didn't charm. He observed, and his observation felt like judgment. At the cathedral's front, Charlotte lifted her chin slightly the way she had been trained. Lady Beatrice leaned toward her daughter for a final correction, a final polish. "You are doing very well," she whispered. Charlotte's smile turned just a fraction brighter. "Everything is as you wanted, Mother." Eliza watched from her shadow, feeling neither jealousy nor hatred nor the sharp, bitter envy people always assume sisters must harbor. Instead, she felt distance, an odd, hollow distance, as if Charlotte belonged to one story and she belonged to another that no one read. Eliza adjusted her sleeve without thinking. The small motion steadied her. Then the cathedral shifted. Not with sound at first, but with sensation, the way air changes before thunder. The main doors opened again, and the low murmurs died as if a hand had clapped over the room's mouth. Alexander Blackwood entered. He wore dark formal attire, clean lines, no flourish. Not because he lacked wealth, but because he had no need to display it. He moved down the aisle with measured steps, each one steady, each one quietly claiming the space. He did not look around like a man entering a social gathering. He looked around like a man entering a room that already belonged to him. People straightened, fans stilled, breaths held. Lady Beatrice leaned closer to Charlotte, urgent but controlled. "Hold your posture. This is the most important moment." Charlotte's eyes flicked toward him, bright and practiced. Her smile remained soft, inviting, flawless. The Duke came forward, then paused only briefly, his gaze sweeping the cathedral with an unnerving calm. Eliza told herself not to look. It was safer not to look. But the instinct to know what danger approached was stronger than her habits. She lifted her eyes carefully from behind the column. The Duke's gaze did not linger on Charlotte. It did not linger on Lady Beatrice. It slid past the front pews, past the social stage, past the place everyone expected him to fix his attention. And for the briefest moment, so brief, she doubted herself. His eyes reached the back of the cathedral and stopped, on Eliza's shadowed corner. Her heart seemed to forget its rhythm. A strange cold heat rose in her throat. She felt seen in a way she had not felt in years, and the sensation startled her so much that she looked down immediately as if her eyes had broken some rule. Impossible, she thought. A coincidence. He was only looking around. Eliza pressed herself closer to the column, letting its stone swallow her again. She was not meant to be the focus of any gaze, least of all his. The Duke moved to his place near the altar. The cathedral exhaled in a collective release that wasn't quite relief. The ceremony began. The Reverend's voice rose steady and solemn, reciting the traditional words that had bound families and fortunes for centuries. The choir's soft notes drifted in, restrained and reverent. Everything returned to its expected script. Lady Beatrice's shoulders lowered slightly. She whispered almost to herself at last. Charlotte stood like the picture of bridal composure. When she turned toward the Duke, her smile held all the sweetness society demanded. Eliza watched with the detached clarity of someone who had spent years observing rather than participating. She could predict what came next. She could almost hear her mother's triumphant thoughts. She could see the ton's approval already forming. And yet something felt unsettled. It was small at first, a crack in the script. Eliza looked up at the Duke again and realized he was not looking at Charlotte. He was not gazing at her the way a groom was supposed to gaze. He was not softening, not warming, not even pretending. His eyes moved over the guests, not drifting, idly searching. Eliza's stomach tightened. Charlotte noticed it too. Her smile froze just a fraction. Her fingers tightened around her bouquet. Lady Beatrice's jaw tensed. She leaned in, lips barely moving. "Look at him. Keep your eyes on him." Charlotte obeyed. Her smile became more deliberate, her face more composed, but the Duke's gaze did not return. The Reverend's voice reached the point that mattered, the moment that could not be rehearsed, the moment that held a room hostage. "Your Grace." The Reverend said, his tone calm but clear, "Do you take Lady Charlotte Ashbourne to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The cathedral fell into absolute silence. Even the faint rustle of clothing seemed to stop. Charlotte's breath caught. Eliza saw it in the slight rise of her chest, the micro-tremor in her hands. Lady Beatrice's eyes fixed on the Duke with fierce certainty, as if she could will him to speak. Eliza's heart began to pound faster now, as if her body sensed the wrongness before her mind could name it. Something was about to happen. Something that did not belong in the plan. One beat passed. Two. The Duke did not answer. A few whispers flared like sparks, quickly smothered by shock. Charlotte's lips parted. Her smile cracked just enough to show the fear beneath. "Your Grace." The Reverend cleared his throat softly, then repeated the question, voice slightly firmer. "Do you accept this lady as your wife?" Lady Beatrice leaned forward, her whisper sharp as a blade. "Answer, now." Eliza could feel the entire room's tension pulling toward a snap. And then the Duke spoke. His voice was low, calm, and absolutely unmistakable. "Not her." The words fell like a stone dropped into still water. No splash at first, only the ripple spreading outward in silence before the shock hit. For a heartbeat, the cathedral was frozen in disbelief. It was as if every person needed a moment to confirm they had heard correctly. Charlotte's bouquet trembled, her face drained of color. What did you say?" Lady Beatrice's breath caught hard, her composure faltering. "Your Grace, surely there is a misunderstanding." The Duke did not look at her. He stood perfectly still, as if he had merely stated a fact that had always been true. Then he turned, slowly, deliberately. Not toward Charlotte, not toward Lady Beatrice. He turned down the long aisle toward the crowd. All eyes followed the motion, as if pulled by a force they could not resist. Eliza remained behind her column, trying to make herself smaller, trying to become the wall again. Every instinct screamed at her to vanish. The Duke's gaze swept over the pews and the faces. He paused for the smallest fraction of time here and there, as if confirming something. Then his eyes reached the back, the darkest part of the cathedral, the place Eliza had always used as refuge, and his gaze stopped completely. Eliza's lungs locked. For a moment she could not draw in air. The Duke lifted his hand and pointed straight at her. "The one there?" he said, his voice not raised, but edged with a clarity that cut through every whisper and breath. "The girl all of you have chosen not to see." The cathedral turned as a single body, heads twisting, shoulders shifting, necks craning. A wave of attention poured down the aisle and crashed into Eliza's corner. Light from the stained glass hit her face at an angle, catching her features, dragging her out of shadow. A nearby servant stepped aside without thinking, leaving Eliza suddenly exposed, standing alone. Someone whispered, sharp with confusion, "Who is that?" Another voice answered, uncertain, I've never seen her." A faint, disbelieving laugh fluttered from somewhere, quickly strangled by fear. What do you think when a powerful duke chooses the one girl no one even noticed instead of the most dazzling woman in the room? Is it madness, or is there something deeper? Everyone else missed. Let me know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe before we dive into the most powerful part of the story. Eliza's first instinct was to step back. Her body moved half a pace before her spine hit the cold stone of the column. Too late to hide. Lady Beatrice's head snapped around. Her eyes landed on Eliza like a slap. "Eliza," she hissed, "stand still." Eliza's voice came out, thin, shaken. "Mother, I don't understand." Charlotte turned too. For the first time that morning, Charlotte looked directly at her sister, not through the lens of preparation or polite obligation, but with raw shock and a strange wounded disbelief. "You," Charlotte whispered, as if the word itself were incomprehensible. Eliza could not answer. There was nothing inside her mind but noise. The Duke remained near the altar for only a moment longer. Then, as if ceremony itself were beneath the urgency of truth, He stepped down. The sound of his shoes against stone echoed through the silence. Each footfall was a statement. Rules no longer mattered. Lady Beatrice lifted her voice, attempting to reclaim authority. "You cannot, Your Grace, you cannot leave your place." He did not turn. He walked down the aisle toward Eliza, and the crowd parted without anyone asking them to. It wasn't courtesy, it was instinct. It was the way people moved aside for power. Eliza watched him approach as if watching a storm crossing open land. He came closer, and with each step, her pulse rose higher, tight and frantic. She could feel every eye on her, every thought formed about her. She could almost taste their judgments. He stopped in front of her, so close she could hear the faint sound of his breathing. So close the air seemed different around him, colder, heavier, calm in a terrifying way. Eliza dropped her gaze automatically, searching for a script, for a rule, for the safe response. "Your Grace," she managed, barely audible. "Look at me," the Duke said. His tone was not harsh, but it carried the same inevitability as an order. Eliza hesitated. Her mother's warnings rang in her ears like alarms. "Don't draw attention. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't stand out." But she lifted her eyes. Their gazes met, and the shock of it stole what remained of her composure. The Duke's eyes were not black as she had once thought. They were storm gray, deep, restless, and painfully aware. They held no flirtation, no play, only recognition. Eliza's throat tightened. I must be mistaken," she whispered, because what else could she say? The Duke gave the faintest shake of his head. "You are not." Lady Beatrice surged forward, fury barely contained behind the smoothness of her upbringing. Eliza stepped back. Eliza flinched, her body reacting before her mind could. Lady Beatrice's hand shot out and seized Eliza's wrist. The grip was firm, possessive, the familiar claim of control. Eliza's breath caught in pain and humiliation. The old feeling returned instantly, small trapped, pulled back into the shape her mother required. But before Lady Beatrice could drag her fully behind the column again, the Duke moved. Not violently, not dramatically. He simply placed himself between them with a subtle shift of his stance, enough to block Lady Beatrice without ever touching her. His presence made the air around them turn sharp. "Do not touch her," he said, voice low. Lady Beatrice stiffened. "Your Grace, you do not understand. I understand more than you think." He replied, his gaze steady. The cathedral held its breath again. Even Charlotte stood frozen, bouquet forgotten. Eliza's wrist still ached, but Lady Beatrice's grip faltered in the face of the Duke's tone. She released Eliza as if letting go of something that had become suddenly dangerous to hold. Lady Beatrice tried to gather herself, to pull dignity back around her shoulders like a cloak. "This is outrageous. My daughter is not suited." The Duke did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He turned slightly so Eliza was behind him, not hidden but shielded. For the first time in Eliza's life, someone stood in front of her without asking her to disappear. Eliza's heart beat so hard it felt like it might break her ribs. She couldn't stop staring at the Duke, unable to understand why he was doing this, why he was dismantling the very thing every other man in the room would have wanted. Lady Beatrice's voice sharpened with desperation. "Your Grace, Charlotte is the one. She has been prepared for this. She has been presented. She has." "I know exactly who Lady Charlotte is," the Duke said, and his tone held no cruelty towards Charlotte, only finality. "And I have never said I would marry her." Gasps broke out. Quiet, shocked, unstoppable. A gentleman whispered, "Then what was this?" A lady pressed her gloved hand to her mouth, eyes wide. Charlotte's face crumpled for a moment into something human: hurt, disbelief, humiliation. She lifted her chin again, trying to recover the training, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Lady Beatrice's gaze flicked to Charlotte, then back to the Duke, then to Eliza, like a predator choosing which threat to destroy first. Eliza stood behind the Duke's shoulder, trembling, her mind racing through fragment of thought. This cannot be real. He cannot mean me. Why would he? She had done nothing. She had spoken to no one. She had stood where she was told. The Duke looked back at her over his shoulder, not as if checking his victory, but as if confirming her existence. And then slowly, he faced Lady Beatrice, again his expression unreadable. "I have never chosen incorrectly," he said, his voice calm enough to terrify. "Not once." The word struck Eliza like a bell tolling through her bones. Chosen. He was saying she was chosen. It was too large to hold in her mind. It was too strange, too impossible. She felt as if the entire cathedral had become a dream she could not wake from. Lady Beatrice's face turned pale beneath her carefully composed expression. She swallowed and tried another strategy, pleading, wrapped in politeness. "Your Grace," she said, voice trembling slightly, "now this is a holy place. There are traditions, there are truths," the Duke cut in, "and there are lies." The Reverend stood, helpless eyes darting between them. Eliza's father, Lord Henry Ashbourne, finally stirred from his stunned silence. His voice came out weak, ashamed. "Beatrice, perhaps we should listen." Lady Beatrice whipped her head toward him, eyes blazing. "Be quiet." The contempt in her voice made Eliza's stomach twist, not because it was new, but because it was familiar. The Duke looked back at Eliza, his voice lowered as if the cathedral and all its witnesses had receded. "Are you harmed?" he asked. Eliza blinked, startled, not by the question, but by the fact that anyone would ask it at all. "No," she managed. Her wrist still ached, but she refused to admit it. Habit again, never let anyone see pain. I'm fine." He studied her face as though reading something written there. Then, with quiet certainty, he said, "You are not." Eliza's breath shuddered. Lady Beatrice stepped forward again, desperate to reclaim the narrative. "Eliza, come here." The old command, the old chain. Eliza felt her body twitch toward obedience. But the Duke did not move aside. He did not shout. He simply held the space. "Do not give her orders," he said to Lady Beatrice, and the gentleness of his control was more humiliating for her than any open insult. "She is not an object to be repositioned." Lady Beatrice's lips tightened. "She is my daughter." "And she is her own person," the Duke replied. A new kind of silence spread. The kind that comes when a room realizes a power it has always accepted without question is being challenged. Eliza's vision blurred for a moment. She blinked hard, forcing tears back. "Not now. Not here." The Duke's voice softened, but only slightly. "Eliza." Hearing her name spoken like that, clear, deliberate, as if it mattered, made her chest ache. "Yes," she whispered. He turned fully toward her now, away from the altar, away from the spectacle. "I will not decide for you," he said. "I can hold back the world. But I will not move your feet for you." Eliza stared at him, stunned. No one had ever said that to her. No one had ever spoken as if her will existed. He continued calmly, "If you want to leave this cathedral and never see any of us again, I will clear the path and no one will stop you." Eliza's throat tightened. Part of her wanted exactly that, to flee, to lock herself in a quiet room where the eyes of London could not find her. "If you want to return to your place behind the column," he said, "I will not drag you into light you do not want." The words struck like a strange mercy. "But if you want to step forward," he finished, voice steady, "do it because you choose it." The cathedral was still, but Eliza felt the weight of 1,000 expectations pressing against her skin from every angle. She looked past the Duke's shoulder at Lady Beatrice. Her mother's eyes were cold, furious, pleading in the most ruthless way. "If you step forward, you will no longer be mine." She looked at Charlotte, still standing near the altar, trembling, hurt, confused. Charlotte's eyes met hers, and for the first time Eliza saw something besides charm and confidence there. She saw a girl who had been trained, used, cornered by a plan she hadn't written herself. And then Eliza looked back at the Duke. He did not look triumphant. He did not look possessive. He looked sure, as if he had known her longer than anyone else in the room. As if he had been waiting not for a marriage, but for this moment of choice. Eliza's hands trembled. Her knees felt weak. She could go back. It would be easy. It would be familiar. She would sink into shadow and let the world continue as if she had never existed. Or she could step forward into light, into judgment, into a future she had never been allowed to imagine. Her breath came shallow. The ache behind her ribs, the old ache of being a footnote, rose up, demanding to be acknowledged. Eliza swallowed. Her voice emerged small but clear. "All my life," she said, staring at the stone floor for a second before lifting her eyes again, "I have stood in the place I was told to stand." Lady Beatrice's face tightened, alarm flashing in her eyes. Eliza continued the words, trembling but unstoppable now. "And I have been quiet, not because I had nothing to say, but because no one wanted to hear it." Her own honesty shocked her. It felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing whether there was ground below. Lady Beatrice hissed Eliza. Eliza did not turn. She looked at the Duke. "I don't understand why you are doing this," she admitted, voice shaking. "But I understand what you just gave me." The Duke's gaze held steady. "Then take it." Eliza's foot moved, one step out from behind the column. A ripple ran through the crowd. Eliza's heart battered her chest, but she forced herself to keep walking slowly, carefully, down the aisle that had been prepared for her sister. Each step felt like crossing a border she had been told her whole life she had no right to cross. The light caught her dress, turning its pale gray into something softer, almost silver. People stared, some with scandal, some with curiosity, some with confusion. But none of that mattered as much as the feeling in Eliza's own body. She was moving because she had chosen to move. She reached the point where the Duke stood waiting. He did not grab her. He did not pull her. He offered his hand open, patient, as if this was the simplest thing in the world. Eliza hesitated only a moment before placing her gloved fingers into his palm. The contact was steady grounding. Not ownership, not force. A choice accepted. Behind them,
You don't have to go
Lady
through this
Beatrice's breath came sharp with panic and
I'm
rage.
afraid.
But no sound
I'm
could
here now.
rewrite what had just happened. The cathedral, once built to hold vows and certainty, now held something else, something rarer. A girl who had been trained to disappear, walking into the center of a story that had never been meant for her. And a man powerful enough to break the world's script, but careful enough not to write hers for her. As the murmurs swelled again louder now, unstoppable, Eliza kept her gaze forward, because for the first time she understood that being seen was not the same as being used, and she was done being used. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't being chosen, it's daring to choose yourself when you've spent a lifetime in the shadows. The cathedral had not recovered from the first fracture. Even after Eliza placed her gloved fingers into the Duke's open palm, the silence remained heavy, no longer the holy hush of ceremony, but the stunned quiet of a room watching its own rules collapse. Alexander Blackwood stood slightly in front of her, not hiding her, not claiming her, but making it clear without violence, without theatrical outrage, that she would not be handled like a piece on Lady Beatrice's board again. Eliza's wrist still carried the memory of her mother's grip. The ache was small, but it felt like a bruise on something deeper on the part of her that had always been tugged back into place. Lady Beatrice tried to recover her composure the way she always did, by tightening her voice into something sharp and controlled. "Your Grace," she said, lowering her tone as if politeness could turn disaster into negotiation. "The girl knows nothing. She has not been prepared for this. She is not suited to stand where you are placing her." Eliza's breath hitched. The words were so familiar they felt carved into her bones. Not suited, not prepared, not meant. But Alexander did not turn to debate Lady Beatrice immediately. He kept his gaze on Eliza as if the important matter was not winning an argument. It was making sure Eliza understood why she was suddenly standing in the center of a cathedral full of witnesses. His voice was quieter when he spoke to her, the storm gray of his eyes steady. "Do you remember Blackwood Manor?" he asked. The name landed like a bell in the far back of Eliza's mind. It pulled at something half-buried, something she hadn't touched in years, because there had never been a reason to. Her family had visited once when she was young. She remembered little only the sense of grand rooms and heavy curtains, the cold stone of corridors and the scent of damp earth outside. Eliza swallowed. "I remember very little." Lady Beatrice made a sharp, dismissive sound. "That was years ago." Alexander's gaze did not leave Eliza. "Yes," he said, "years ago. Before I was Duke." The Reverend's hands trembled around the open book of vows. Charlotte stood near the altar with her bouquet, lowered her face pale, her eyes fixed on Eliza as if she were looking at a stranger. Alexander continued, his voice calm enough that the room leaned toward it. Even the whispers quieted curiosity, overtaking shock. "I was not always what you see now," he said. "At that time, I was simply an older brother who had just lost his younger one." A chill passed through the cathedral, not from cold, but from the sudden gravity of grief in a place built for ceremony. The kind of sorrow that didn't fit into polite society. The kind of sorrow that didn't care who was watching. Eliza's mind flickered with images she had not seen clearly in years. A garden wide and wet with mist. The sound of water near stone. A young man sitting alone with his shoulders bent as if the weight inside him was physical. Alexander looked briefly toward the stained glass, as if seeing something else beyond it. After his death, he said, "I could not endure the drawing rooms, the condolences, the performances of sympathy. Everyone spoke to me as if words could fill an absence." He paused. "I went out to the back garden. I sat by the pond because it was the only place no one followed me. I did not want comfort. I did not want prayers. I wanted silence." Eliza's throat tightened. The memory was sharpening now, coming into focus like a painting cleared of dust. "I believed no one could come near me," Alexander said, and for the first time, a roughness edged his calm. "I believed I would drive anyone away." Eliza heard herself whisper not to the room, but to the past. "I remember the pond." Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed. Eliza Alexander's voice cut her off without raising. "Let her remember." The authority in his tone made even Lady Beatrice still. Eliza felt a strange, unfamiliar permission settle into her chest, the permission to speak without being erased. Alexander's gaze returned to Eliza. "Then a little girl walked out," he said. "She did not ask why I was crying. She did not demand I explain myself. She did not attempt to fix me with sweet, useless phrases." Eliza's fingers trembled in his palm. She could see it now herself as a child, carrying a small cloth pouch her nurse had given her with biscuits for the carriage ride home. She had wandered into the garden because she disliked the noise indoors, and she had found him alone, ruined, trying to be invisible in his own home. Eliza's breath caught. "You were him." Alexander gave the smallest nod. "You sat down beside me," he continued, "not for a minute, not for politeness, for nearly an hour." Eliza's eyes stung, the embarrassment of being seen so clearly mixing with a startling ache. She had forgotten that moment. She had forgotten it because her life had been trained into a different shape afterward, because small, quiet kindness had never been praised in her home. It had been ignored. Alexander's voice softened almost imperceptibly. "You took out a biscuit," he said. "You broke it in half and held one piece out to me." Eliza swallowed hard. Her childhood self rose in her mind like a ghost. "I thought," her voice came out thin, "I thought you didn't take it?" "I did," Alexander said. The certainty in his tone made her chest tighten. "I did. And it was the first time in months I felt I was still human." The words hung there too honest for a room full of strangers, too intimate to be spoken in public. And yet, he had chosen public. Not because he enjoyed spectacle, but because truth sometimes required witnesses. Eliza stared at him, her mind trying to hold the impossibility of this. A moment she had barely remembered had survived in him for years. In him, it had become something that shaped his life. "You," Eliza whispered, and she didn't know how to finish. "You remembered me. You looked for me. You came here for that." Alexander's gaze stayed on her, as if he understood every unfinished question. "I never forgot you," he said. A ripple of murmurs rose again across the cathedral. People turned their heads, exchanging quick glances. It was one thing to witness scandal. It was another to witness a story. Lady Beatrice's voice cut through the room, sharp with panic, disguised as dignity. "This is sentimental nonsense," she snapped. "A childish memory. It cannot determine a marriage." Alexander finally turned his head toward her, and the shift in his expression cooled the air. "It is not a memory," he said. "It is a truth." His gaze returned to Eliza as if he refused to let the room's opinion taint this moment. Eliza's breath shook. She had spent her life being told she did not matter. And now a man who had every reason to seek a brilliant, polished bride was speaking of her as if she had always been inevitable. Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger toward Eliza, but with resolve. "I did not come here today to cause chaos," he said louder now so the room could hear. "I came to end a lie that has lasted too long." Lady Beatrice stiffened. What lie? Alexander's gaze held hers without blinking. "I did not forget her name," he said, and his voice made the cathedral feel suddenly small. "Eliza Ashburn. The way he said it, steady, familiar, sent another wave of unease through the crowd. People did not speak a forgotten girl's name like that unless they had carried it. Eliza felt her own name hit her differently, not as a label thrown in irritation, not as a whisper of inconvenience, spoken like it belonged somewhere important. Alexander continued, each sentence measured. When I inherited my title, he said, I began to ask after her. I asked after the family. I sent invitations. I attended events I had no interest in attending. I endured rooms full of noise simply to confirm whether she existed as more than a childhood memory. Eliza's stomach tightened. She pictured ballrooms she had stood in shadow in. She pictured herself half hidden behind curtains, behind pillars, behind other women's laughter. And each time Alexander said, his eyes hardening, your family placed Lady Charlotte in front of me. Charlotte flinched as if struck. Her hands tightened around the bouquet. Lady Beatrice lifted her chin. Charlotte is the jewel of the family. Alexander's gaze cut to her. Each time I asked about your elder daughter, you changed the subject. Lady Beatrice's lips parted, then pressed together. I did what was best for my family, she said through her teeth. Alexander's response was quiet and cold. No. You did what was best for your ambition. A stunned hush fell. Eliza felt a sharp constriction behind her ribs, not because the accusation surprised her, but because someone had finally said it aloud, someone powerful enough that the truth could not be brushed aside. Eliza's mind reeled. So many nights she had told herself she was simply not worth notice. She had accepted invisibility as proof of her lack, but now the possibility surfaced terrifying, clarifying. She had been hidden. Charlotte's voice broke small and disbelieving. Mother, he asked about Eliza. Lady Beatrice did not answer immediately. Her silence was an answer more brutal than words. Charlotte's shoulders sagged, not in jealousy, not in rage, something else. A dawning realization that she had been pushed forward like a shield, a decoy, an offering. Eliza looked at her sister and felt a strange sorrow. Charlotte had been favored, yes, but favor was not always freedom. Sometimes it was a different kind of cage. Alexander spoke again, and Eliza's attention snapped back to him. I did not come here to humiliate Lady Charlotte, he said, his tone steady. I came to stop the continuation of a lie that says the loudest and brightest person is the only one worth choosing. Lady Beatrice's composure cracked. You do not understand what it means to keep a family afloat. Charlotte was born to stand before society. She knows how to speak, how to smile, how to be loved. Then she turned her eyes on Eliza with the familiar contempt Eliza had swallowed her whole life. And this one, Lady Beatrice said, voice sharpening, this one is always silent, always awkward, always making people uncomfortable. She is not. Eliza lowered her gaze instinctively. Each word fell like an old stone she had carried so long she thought it was part of her. Alexander took a half-step closer, not touching Eliza, not moving her, but placing himself near enough that she was no longer alone, under Lady Beatrice's voice. You call her quietness awkward, he said. You call her kindness weakness. You call her refusal to perform worthlessness. Lady Beatrice's jaw clenched. A duchess must be respected. A duchess must have dignity, Alexander replied, and his eyes swept the front of the cathedral as if daring anyone to disagree. And in this room, the person with the most dignity is not the one you placed at the altar. Charlotte's face tightened. The words were not a direct insult. Yet they confirmed what she had begun to suspect, that this marriage had never been about her, not truly. It had been about a title, about a win. Lord Henry Ashbourne finally spoke again, voice trembling with regret. "Beatrice, perhaps we have been too hard on Eliza." Lady Beatrice snapped her head toward him. "Do not pretend you have a conscience now." Lord Henry flinched as if struck. His gaze dropped, shame written in every line of his posture. Eliza felt pain sharper than her mother's, cruelty pain, that her father's silence had been a choice. Alexander's gaze returned to Eliza, and his voice softened just slightly. "You were not overlooked because you were unworthy of being seen," he said. "You were hidden because those around you feared what would happen if someone looked closely enough to realize they were wrong." Eliza's lips parted. She didn't know how to breathe through the sudden rush of validation and grief. A lifetime of being erased did not disappear simply because someone spoke the opposite. It only made the opposite feel unbearable. Lady Beatrice tried to regain ground with a final argument, one rooted in the world's rules. "He is the Duke," she said, enunciating as if the title itself was law. "He needs a wife suited to his rank. Charlotte has been prepared for that." Alexander turned his eyes to Charlotte. His expression held no contempt, only clarity. "Lady Charlotte may be suited to be a wife to a different man," he said, "but not to me." Charlotte's face went white. Humiliation flashed through her, then something like relief, a fragile, confusing relief. Because she had not loved him. She had barely known him beyond his title. She had been trained to want him the way she had been trained to stand straight. Alexander looked back to Eliza. "I am not seeking a jewel to display," he said. "I do not need a smile practiced in a mirror. I have lived long enough among false words." He paused, his voice dropping lower, more personal. "I am seeking the person who sat beside me when I had nothing left to offer." Eliza's throat tightened. "But I was only a child." "That is why it was real," Alexander said without hesitation. "You did not know who I was. You did not know who I would become. You saw a grieving stranger, and you did not leave." Eliza's eyes burned. She blinked hard, forcing herself not to cry in front of everyone. Tears felt like weakness in her mother's house. Tears were something that got you punished with contempt. But Alexander's gaze held her as if tears were simply proof that she was human. The cathedral still contained hundreds of eyes, still held judgment and scandal and gossip, ready to scatter across London like ash on the wind. Yet between Eliza and Alexander, a small pocket of quiet formed as if he carried stillness with him, the way other men carried arrogance. Alexander spoke again, not to the crowd now, but to her. "I believed I was strong because I could live alone," he said softly. "But the truth is, I only became accustomed to loneliness." Eliza looked at him, really looked, and for the first time she saw beyond the Duke everyone feared. She saw exhaustion, restraint, a man who had built walls not because he enjoyed coldness, but because he did not know how to survive without it. "Every time I saw you standing in the corner of a room," he said, "I did not see weakness. I saw the only person who refused to become what others demanded." Eliza's voice came out like a confession. "I never thought my silence had any value." His eyes softened just a fraction. "To me, it is the only place that is not loud." The simplicity of the statement cracked something inside her. It was not flattery, not a promise of riches. It was recognition of the part of her the world had refused to acknowledge. Lady Beatrice's voice rose again, harsher now, desperate. "Enough," she snapped. "A childish memory cannot decide a marriage. Eliza does not have the strength to be a duchess." Alexander's gaze turned icy. "You have spent her entire life teaching her to lower her eyes," he said. "And then you use the lowered eyes as evidence that she is unworthy." Lady Beatrice's mouth opened, then closed. The accusation landed too cleanly to be dodged. "I am her mother," she said, grasping for authority. "I know what is best for her." "No," Alexander replied, his calm more ruthless than shouting. "You know what is convenient for you." A wave of whispers rolled through the pews. Lady Beatrice looked around and saw, perhaps for the first time, that the audience she relied on, the judges of society, had turned curious rather than obedient. Her control was slipping, and she could feel it. Alexander's voice rose slightly, deliberate enough for everyone to hear. "You hid her," he said. "I came to bring her into the light." Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed with fury, and she turned that fury on Eliza. "If you step forward," she hissed, voice trembling with rage and fear, "do not expect to remain my daughter." The threat hit Eliza like a fist. Not because it was new, but because it named the deepest fear that had kept her compliant for years. If you choose yourself, you lose your family. Eliza's breath stuttered. She felt her body want to fold, to retreat into the place she had always known, the place where pain was familiar and therefore bearable. Alexander turned to her immediately, and in his movement there was no possession, no triumph, only steadiness. "Eliza," he said quietly, close enough that his voice did not feel like a performance. "Look at me." Eliza lifted her eyes, trembling. "I can stand against this entire room," Alexander said, "but I will not decide your life for you." Her breath caught. "If you wish to leave," he continued, "I will clear the way. No one will stop you." Eliza glanced down the aisle toward the doors, toward escape. "If you wish to return to the shadow and let them keep you there," he said, "I will not drag you into a life you do not want." Eliza's fingers curled, nails pressing into her glove. "But if you want to step forward," he finished, "do it because you choose it, not because I choose it." Eliza stared at him as if he had offered her something she didn't know existed. Choice, not permission, not allowance. Choice. She looked at her mother, Lady Beatrice's cold eyes, her rigid posture, the familiar promise of punishment. She looked at Charlotte, hurt, shaking but no longer shining with certainty, because certainty had been built for her rather than by her. She looked at her father, shoulders slumped, regret too late. Then she looked back at Alexander, a man who had shattered his own ceremony, not to claim a prize, but to tell the truth about a girl the world had decided not to see. Eliza inhaled, forcing air into lungs that felt too tight. She did not step forward immediately. That would have been a fairy tale. A simple choice made easy by dramatic music. Instead, she straightened, just a little. A movement so small most people would miss it, but Alexander's eyes caught it, and something in his expression eased, as if he understood the cost of that inch of courage. Eliza's voice came out quiet, but clear enough in the still cathedral. "All my life," she said, "going back into the shadows has been easier." Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed. Eliza continued, eyes fixed on the aisle that separated the life she knew from the life she had never been allowed to imagine. But being easy has never made it right. And with that, she made her decision, not with a leap, with a step. one foot out from behind the safety of her old place, then another. The light caught her dress turning pale gray into something that looked suddenly like silver rather than ash. She walked down the aisle that had been prepared for her sister, not because she wanted to steal anything, but because she wanted to stop being stolen from. She came to stand beside Alexander, and he offered his hand, again open, patient. Waiting, Eliza placed her fingers in his palm. The cathedral saw the gesture, and the ton would talk about it for months. They would name it scandal. They would name it madness. They would name it triumph. But inside Eliza's chest, it felt like something far quieter. It felt like breathing. The Reverend stood helpless, the ceremony broken beyond repair. Alexander turned toward him with calm finality. "This wedding will not continue today," he said. A wave of whispers surged louder now, unstoppable. The Ashbourne name, the Blackwood name, Charlotte's humiliation, Eliza's sudden emergence, everything becoming fuel for London's hunger. Lord Henry Ashbourne stepped forward at last, voice shaking with guilt. "Beatrice, enough. We have harmed both our daughters." Lady Beatrice's face twisted. "Now you speak." Lord Henry lowered his head. "Yes, and it is my failure." Alexander did not prolong the scene. He knew every extra second would grind Eliza under the weight of attention. He looked down at her, voice low. "Do you want to leave?" Eliza looked around at the cathedral that had been meant to make her sister's life and had instead cracked open her own. "Yes," she said. Alexander extended his hand again, and this time Eliza did not hesitate. She took it, and together they turned toward the aisle, toward the doors, toward whatever waited beyond the cathedral's judgment. Behind them, Charlotte's voice broke through the murmurs. "Eliza." Eliza stopped and turned. Charlotte held her bouquet too tightly, knuckles white. Her face was streaked with shock, but something deeper moved under it, something raw and honest. "I thought," Charlotte swallowed, "I thought this was what I wanted. I thought becoming Duchess would make me matter." Lady Beatrice snapped Charlotte. But Charlotte's voice grew steadier, as if she was finally speaking for herself. "I don't love him," she said, and the words made the cathedral gasp again. "I never did. I only wanted Mother to stop looking at me like I was an investment." Eliza stared at her sister. The truth hit like a quiet wave. Charlotte's cage had been built of praise and expectation, while Eliza's had been built of dismissal. Different bars. Same prison. Alexander spoke once short and almost gentle. "Then today more than one person is free." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, not the theatrical kind meant for sympathy, but the private kind that comes when someone finally admits the truth aloud. Eliza's chest tightened with something like sorrow and relief. She did not hate Charlotte. She never truly had. She hated the architecture of a family that had forced them into roles and called it love. Eliza nodded once to her sister, not forgiveness as a grand gesture, but acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked out with Alexander. London did what London always did. It whispered. It speculated. It turned tragedy into entertainment and entertainment into moral instruction. In every drawing room and salon, someone reenacted the Duke's calm voice, not her. Someone described Eliza's pale gown and shaking hands. Someone exaggerated Lady Beatrice's rage. Someone pitied Charlotte. Someone praised or condemned Alexander. The scandal moved like fire through dry grass, but no one dared oppose the Duke openly. Power had its own gravity, and Alexander Blackwood had enough of it to bend the Tun's indignation into a quieter, more cautious kind of curiosity. Months passed. Eliza expected to be dragged into yet another public performance, another grand wedding, another stage built for spectators. That was how society functioned. It demanded proof. But Alexander asked her one evening in a quiet room with only a small fire and a single lamp, "What do you want?" The question stunned her more than the cathedral had. Eliza stared at the flames, searching for an answer that belonged to her rather than to someone else's plan. "I don't want another room full of people staring at me," she admitted. "I don't want to feel like a story they get to tell." Alexander nodded once, as if her words were the most reasonable thing in the world. "Then we won't give them that room," he said. They married quietly. No spectacle. No sea of curious faces. No triumph for the ton. Only a small chapel, a few witnesses who mattered, and the steady presence of a man who had never wanted the crowd, only the person. Becoming Duchess did not change Eliza into someone louder. It did not turn her into a woman who enjoyed attention. She still loved mornings when the world was quiet. She still read near windows. She still spoke carefully, thoughtfully. The difference was that silence was no longer punishment. In Blackwood Manor, no one demanded she vanish. No one told her her quietness was a flaw. And Alexander Cold, severe Alexander Blackwood, became something different in the privacy of their days. Their love did not erupt in grand declarations. It grew in the small, steady ways Eliza trusted. Breakfasts where they sat together without forcing conversation, and the silence did not feel like rejection. Walks through the garden where he let her set the pace. Evenings by the fire, where books lay open beside them, their shoulders sometimes close enough to touch. At first, Eliza still looked to him when servants asked a question, as if waiting for him to answer, as if her opinion needed permission. Alexander would tilt his head toward her gently and say, "It's your choice, Eliza. This is your home too." The words did not fix her habits overnight, but they loosened them. Slowly. She chose the curtains for the library. She insisted on keeping the old garden rather than redesigning it for show. She suggested opening a small reading room for village children, because she remembered what it had been like to find comfort in quiet pages. Alexander listened not indulgently, but with real respect, as if her thoughts were not decoration, but worth. One evening, Eliza asked him a question she had carried since the cathedral, careful and hesitant. "Do you ever regret it?" she said. Alexander looked up from his book. "Regret? What's stopping the wedding?" Eliza answered. "Making all of London speak your name like it was a scandal." He paused as if considering. "Yes," he said. Eliza froze. A sudden sharp fear flared. Had she misread everything? Was this peace temporary? Then Alexander set his book aside and added calmly, "I regret that I didn't do it sooner." Eliza blinked. Then a soft laugh slipped out, small, surprised, real. It wasn't the trained laugh of a lady. It was the laugh of a woman who had finally found safety. Alexander watched her laugh like a man seeing sunlight after years in a locked room. Healing did not come in a straight line. There were days Eliza flinched when voices rose, days she doubted herself and returned to quiet old habits, days she dreamed of the cathedral and woke with her heart racing. And there were days Alexander stood at the edge of the pond in the back garden, the same pond from the story he had told, and went silent for too long. Eliza learned not to demand explanations the way society did. She learned that grief did not always want questions. Sometimes it wanted company. One afternoon she walked with him to the pond. The air was damp and soft. The water held the gray sky like a mirror. Alexander stood still, hands clasped behind his back, staring into the water as if looking for something lost. Eliza did not speak. She simply stood beside him. After a long time, Alexander's voice came quietly. That day he said, "You saved me without knowing." Eliza's throat tightened. "And perhaps you did the same for me." He turned his head slightly, eyes softer than the ton would ever believe. "No," he said. "I only opened a door." He looked at her fully then. "You were the one who stepped through." A year after the cathedral, Eliza stood on a balcony at Blackwood Manor looking out over the gardens. She wore a simple dress as she always preferred. Not because she needed to hide now, but because simplicity felt like truth. Behind her, Alexander approached without startling her. She had learned the sound of his steps, the way one learns the rhythm of a familiar song. He stopped at her side, the air between them warm and calm. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Eliza smiled faintly, eyes still on the garden. "I'm thinking about that day," she said. Alexander's mouth curved slightly. "The day I made London hate me." Eliza turned her head to look at him. "The day you let me choose." Alexander's expression softened with something like wonder, as if even now he could not quite believe the world had given him back the girl from the pond. He reached for her hand, an old habit now, but never an assumption. Always an offer. Eliza placed her fingers in his palm. After a moment, she reached into a small pocket sewn discreetly into her dress and pulled out a neatly wrapped bundle of cloth. Alexander's eyes narrowed in mild curiosity. "What is that?" Eliza unwrapped it carefully, revealing a simple biscuit plane, unremarkable, the kind that would never appear at a grand table. Alexander stared for a second, then his gaze softened in recognition. "You remembered," he murmured. Eliza's smile turned gentler. "This time I remember very clearly." She broke the biscuit in half and held one piece out to him. Alexander took it with quiet reverence, as if receiving something sacred. "A half biscuit changed my life," he said softly. Eliza shook her head, eyes glistening. "No, it only reminded you that you weren't truly alone." Alexander lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. Slow, respectful, intimate in the way that mattered. They stood there in the quiet, two people who had found each other not through brightness and performance, but through stillness and truth. London could keep its gossip. Eliza no longer needed the ton to approve her existence, because she had finally learned the difference between being invisible and being free. The brightest person in the room isn't always the one worth choosing. Sometimes the greatest love is simply being truly seen and having the courage to step into that vision with your own 2 feet. Thank you for staying with this story, one where the quietest heart was the one truly seen. If this ending moved you, a simple like or a comment sharing, your thoughts would mean a lot. And if you enjoy stories about hidden strength and unexpected love, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next one. There are many more stories waiting to be told.